Hey, everybody. Welcome to the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Hey, what we do on this podcast is talk about what B2B sales and marketing leaders, operators, and experts are doing today to really break through and grow their businesses at exponential levels. Let's get it in the interview. At the end, I'll give you an update on my courses, and you can check out my website at b2brevenue.com, and it's Brian G. Burns on LinkedIn.
Hey, Michael, welcome to the show. As way of getting started, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I am located in the Bay Area. I'm the Director of Revenue Performance here at Chili Piper. I've worked in pretty much every role in sales, starting as a SDR and account executive, and then moved into leadership pretty quickly after that, and have really enjoyed the profession and working alongside great salespeople and sales leaders all across the U.S.
How have you found it being a leader versus a rep?
Stark similarities and stark differences. I think that driving key outcomes is one thing that is a constant in both roles. How I might do that is a little bit different, but being a driver of outcomes is something that has been an important theme, whether I was an SDR doing top line, an AE, like constantly trying to drive net new revenue, or a sales leader who's driving outcomes across teams of people, or even things like implementing new products that you know will be essential in helping your team perform. So I found that, that characteristic to be really important. I've enjoyed all of those different roles. The thing I like particularly about leadership is I get to help other people, and also I get to see and learn constantly. I think sometimes people look at leaders, or at least I did when I was a brand new SDR, as like having all the answers. But I think I learn way more now than perhaps I did as an SDR, which has been really awesome for me personally. And I try to instill that in our culture here at Chili Piper.
Cool. And how about your training program? Have you come up with something that works for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I call it the 5 cornerstones of world-class sales training. And we basically really put an emphasis on growth. I know that's something that people like to talk about. It's something that is one of the key drivers of recruiting and retaining top talent. We've had a really phenomenal retention rate here at Chili Piper, and I attribute much of that to our ability to hire, lead, and train and coach our revenue-facing teams. So our SDRs, our account executives, and our account managers is what I primarily work with. And all of that is rooted in training. So the 5 cornerstones of world-class sales training is what I call it. Happy to walk through those if that's helpful for you.
Yeah, let's start with number 1. It's probably usually the most important one.
Yeah, absolutely. The first one, the first step number 1 is microlearning, or an emphasis on microlearning. So the way that we do it here at Chili Piper is we introduce concepts. Basically, you can kind of think of it in chunks, or in almost like sound bites, where we'll craft a material on a content basis, and we have all of the SDRs, AEs, and account managers in on these trainings. So it's something that can be applicable to everyone. So we might introduce new concepts that are clustered together from a book that we recently read. It might be something that's not in a book that we just, that's a part of our sales process that we know is key to driving the outcomes that we want. We really use micro learning and chunking these things down so that it's super digestible, and also something that is tangible, that someone can then take back to the call and really focus on that one thing before they move on to the next skill item. And for us, it's made all the world of difference to that. So I'll give an example. One of the books that we had the team read recently is Never Split the Difference, a super popular book in the sales world. and I'll get to this in one of the future steps, but I worked with one of our account managers to actually produce the content from that book and share it with the sales team. He did a phenomenal job with that production. One of the concepts we really focused on was getting to know, and then we had the whole team focus on that one concept sort of repeatedly out of that book, and then we moved on to the other concepts. So this whole concept of micro learning or breaking it down into chunks has been a really great learning methodology for our team.
And how often do you give a chunk? Is it once a week, once every 2 weeks?
Yeah, so it depends. We might even have a couple of different pieces of information in one training. Typically, it's just focusing on one piece of information every week. If it's fairly digestible, we might do like 2 to 3 in one training. It's not in any set like format, but we do break it down into concepts. So I'd say anywhere from like 1 to 3 every week. And it doesn't mean that we're necessarily introducing new concepts every week, but maybe we want to spend a little bit more time on the concept in the following week training, but we do have a weekly cadence of training set up, even if that training is meant to reinforce the previous week. So I'd say anywhere between 1 and 3.
And is it like in a conference room where you talk about it? Or do you have quizzes, or how do you know it's retained?
That's a really great great question. So that actually brings me to a point too. So our entire team is and the whole company is entirely distributed. We don't have a centralized HQ like most companies do. So we're all distributed. So we work off of Zoom primarily. And so all of our trainings are over Zoom where everybody hops on together. The second point in the 5 cornerstones, though, is follow up and reinforcement. And so it's one thing to introduce to a concept to someone, but very rarely can someone just retain that and then begin applying it like immediately. So we really focus on introducing the new concept and then not letting it fall through the cracks. Where so often when learning in general for any role happens, it's introduced and it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. I recognize that in my own career and working with people when I was a brand new manager. So we try to instill things to prevent that from happening. So we'll do things like follow-ups in our one-on-ones. We'll do segmented out groups that are smaller than compared to that like larger training. People will use sales enablement tools to submit calls proving that they've like learned the concept. There's a whole bunch of different things that we do to really like focus on follow-up and reinforcement of it. And it's not in a punitive or like even like an accountability way. It's just that enforcement that the skill is has been learned, and it's just a cadence that we build into how we learn as a team. And I've gotten really tremendous feedback from it there.
And so you encourage or you require the team to come up with the micro lesson?
Yeah. So actually, the third point that I in the 5 cornerstones is a diffuse sort of leadership structure. Yeah. So I think oftentimes, at least in my own career, a lot of the training was coming from like one individual. And I think that can be useful, especially if one person is ultimately responsible for it and driving those outcomes. I think that is important. But I think when it comes from introducing, presenting different takes, like people learn in fundamentally different ways. And I think getting different perspectives or even like different voices will help people like retain that information better. And so we have a diffused leadership structure, both in the content presentation and the content development. And then this diffused structure enables for a more, for it to be more embedded into our culture as a sales team. And so it's not just top down, like, oh, you need to do this. This is, how we do things here, but rather making it institutionalized where everyone in the company is super driven by the concept of growing and learning. And then what happens as a result is when you're not around, they end up kind of helping each other, and it sets up this really cool dynamic. So that's the third point, is the diffused leadership structure.
And do you also do the classic like 2-day workshop at kickoff, or this is your training process?
Yeah, so because we're remote, we don't have the traditional SKOs like most companies do. We do have company offsites. We just took our company in October to Ibiza. So we all do get to hang out and spend FaceTime with each other. We just do that a little bit differently. Um, Throughout the year, we don't have any sort of like formalized like structure like that, like a lot of companies do, where it's like an offsite for 2 days. But we replaced it with these trips. We've done Paris in the past, and we're working towards another one right now. Um, and so this type of structure where we do it weekly tends to serve us well in terms of how we approach training in general.
And so it is kind of the team driven versus picking like a particular compounding. Like let's take something simple, or questioning, or handling objections, or understanding what the other person is saying and meaning.
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes the person presenting will be myself or the CEO, and it will be on a topic that maybe something that we noticed. Um, my point with that is that it's not only us presenting, it's not only us coming up with content. For sure, though, if I see that the basics, for example, I spent a good 6 months chunk of time really focusing on the basics of discovery, how to demo properly, like next steps, things like that. Um, and the deviation comes from the degree of learning I saw from peer to peer, as well as getting feedback. So it's not just one form, but it's employing several different forms of communication, both from leadership at the manager level and C-suite, and then also the peer-to-peer learning as well, which encompasses sales process as well. And it's really born out of the idea of focusing not just on the what. So I think sometimes in sales organization, it's like we need to hit our quotas. We need to focus on these outcomes, and it's like the what. And I've pivoted a lot more to focusing the what is important, but also focusing on like how do you actually do it? Like how do you put together a cadence? How do I, when I get this specific objection, like how do I deal with that? Or if I literally have seen salespeople who had a very, very tough time running simple discovery in 1 month and zero revenue on the board, to the next month being one of the top performers because of tweaks there. And a lot of that is because of the coachability of the sales rep, but also like how that person is being led, taught, and trained is really important too.
And how do you determine, like during the interview process, that the person's going to be open to this versus the know-it-alls or the I know what I'm doing, leave me alone types?
Yeah, I usually can tell by someone. So I wrote an article about this a while back. I'm like, it's called 5 Reasons Why I Didn't Hire You. And then the first point,
you like the 5, huh?
I do. It's my favorite number. So maybe it was 4 reasons. But the first was I conduct a role play basically with them. And you can tell a lot by asking someone to do a role play and then giving feedback and asking them to do it again. Is it, fail proof? I don't think any hiring strategy is fail proof. But it's a big step in the right direction, away from gut check strategies of hiring of, oh, I think this person, or, oh, I feel this person will be good at this. But rather we put them in the closest situations that we can to what they'll be doing on an actual day-to-day. And then we see how they respond in those situations. For example, one of the most common response I get from people after I ask them to do a role play in an interview is, oh, I could have done better if I only knew more about the product. And I think that's like a very kind of negative way to review yourself for that situation. A growth mindset would be like, oh, I could have done this better, whether it's tonality or asking better questions or uncovering a deeper reason for someone to take a meeting before you set it up. There's a whole plethora of things that usually we could all improve improve upon, myself included, if I did the exercise. And so I'm really looking for that person who is truly hungry to grow. There is a baseline of, sales acumen and being able to, talk their way, through basic maybe objections, or just like a basic framework of understanding, like a cold call or a discovery call. But that's one exercise of several that we do, but it's basically trying to be more in the direction of empiricism, less in the direction of gut check.
Yeah, no, that's good. What's number 4 on the training?
Yeah, so number 4 is relevance. And so we place a higher emphasis of relevance over theory. And so this is using like real calls, real situations. So I might present a concept that's really important for people to learn, but it's never just theory. It's never just philosophy. It's always the practical application that will, again, show how maybe a situation could have been better or improved, or where someone did a really good job. But it's always connecting the dots between, what we're actually learning and what's happening on the phones. And I think that piece is fundamentally crucial. It's always the first thing I do when I go into an organization as a new leader, and it's the outcome that or the thing that I do that I think is the most important to driving the outcomes that we want. And I think so much of it provides insights into what's actually happening on the phone. So the real focus on relevance.
And how do you do that? Case study based?
So a lot of it, you could say it's a case study format. A lot of it is through, for example, on the first concept, if we're learning about a specific piece of micro content, and I will show examples from either outside of the company or inside of the company, or real examples where that has been done really well. To connect the concept to how they would actually practically do it. So in the example, to use never split the difference again, if you're getting to know, we connected how getting to a no through emailing at Chili Piper is like very relevant to their actual job. So we connect the dots for people. It's not just, oh, go read this book and okay, you're done. It's how does this exactly play out to your actual job here as someone who is prospecting every day, or who is closing new deals every day. And for me, connecting the dots has been super important to driving the learning outcomes for the team.
Yeah. And are you finding like building their judgment skills about how to handle a particular situation?
That's such a good question. I found that over time they become self-sufficient, which is ultimately the goal of any leader. If you had a self-sufficient sales team, but they establish self-sufficiency, which is like beyond expertise for me, in being able to do it themselves in a motivated way, and then turn around and be able to teach that to other people too. That's like the real, where the real love of this concept comes from, is because then it creates that culture. They're self-sufficient, and it just has only positive benefits from there.
Yeah, cool. And what's number 5?
Number 5, the last one. So we always try to make it like very buyer focused. So even in these, in their replies, in their responses, the common thread of everything that we do is not responding with like a selfish response or something that's super like product driven, like 5 layers deeper, like most of our managers want, but 1 or 2 layers deeper, we would get so much better results than, I hear other, leaders talking about this too. And people talk about this so much because we get on demo, I've sat in on so many sales demos just this year of evaluating products at other companies. And still so much of them are done in this knee-jerk reaction way where it's like, I have this problem. And then we're immediately pitching. We're immediately telling about ourselves. On one demo, someone was giving us like the history of their company and like a slide. And like, it's just like, it sounds ridiculous, but these things are still happening all the time in 2020. And I think if we just pause and think, how can we learn a little bit deeper about what the underlying motivations are of that particular person, we might get some of the results that we're looking for if we make all of our answers and our questions more buyer focused. So that's a fifth cornerstone.
Yeah, I mean, if you can do that, that's really the hardest, getting people out of their own head.
Yeah.
Yeah. And trying to think like a client, what I call the outward mindset.
Yeah, it's really hard for people to do that and take themselves out of their own shoes. But I noticed a trend with managers. As soon as someone was put in a different type of role, they were understanding concepts that I was trying to teach them when they were maybe a sales rep. So what I started doing is I would put prospecting emails that I get in front of the sales team to make them think about it. And then they had all the answers, and then when they were able to have the awareness around other people, then they could have awareness around themselves. And that was that was one specific strategy I deployed, because it's really hard for you to just automatically get that third party perspective when it's your job to sell. And so if I put them in a little bit of a different situation, it's like, okay, this is what it looks like for me. Or I would take a snippet of a call of a real demo I was on at another company and show them that. And then they immediately, they just get the concept that I had been trying to teach them for 3 months so much, instantly. And it's instantly conveyed. So yeah, I think that's such an interesting topic.
Yeah. And I've always used the question, if you were them, what would you do?
Yeah.
Or what would you be concerned with? Why do you think it's stalling?
Yeah, that's a great indirect question to get them thinking.
Yeah, because their inward mindset is worried about their job and their survival.
Yeah.
And that blinds them from what the other person is thinking.
Yeah. And I think sometimes they're incentivized very heavily to close revenue. So they shoot to the outcome too.
Right.
When if we slow it down a little bit and okay, well, how do we, yes, that's the goal, but there's there's a million little things that we need to do before we just, okay, are you ready to move forward? And I think sometimes if we can slow it down a little bit and, take a deep breath, we'll actually get those outcomes in a better way.
And how do you kind of handle, you get the what to do, but how do you do it? Email's easy, you write it, you can see it, but on the phone, there's tonality, there's pausing, there's questions, pacing, leading.
Yeah, it's tough. I've actually found recently that on the email topic, it not being as simple as I think we have assumed in the past. For example, a lot of companies have some sort of cadence technology that automates the emails. What isn't automated is the next email when the person actually replies. And I think if sales managers take a second and go look at some of those emails, you'd be maybe pleasantly surprised. But my guess is a little bit in the other direction of type of surprise, because you never hear about the concept of email coaching and what do you do when someone replies. And I spent 2 weeks on this with a team where they would get a reply. I would look at it. I would help them craft responses, and then they were able to be again more self-sufficient than before. And that was something that really drove metrics there. So that was one thing through email that I think a lot of people miss. They just put people in cadences and oh, the cadence will take care of it, and it's not that simple. The other thing with calls is that is very hard. People, most people already have call reluctance, a fear of being rejected. I think I place a lot of, emphasis of people who are trying to do well in that channel, because I know it has gotten much harder, but it still is successful and still can be very successful for many companies out there if done correctly. And so I think just making the concerted effort to coach people around again this concept of micro learning. So for example, if someone had a cold call that maybe didn't go so well, there's usually two things I'll do. I'll either focus on the biggest room for improvement on the call and then focus on that for the next few days until they have that down and are able to do it sufficiently. or I'll look at the call as a funnel and focus at the beginning of the call. Okay, let's just get the intro down. And I'm not even worried about the result. Like, there's nothing punitive going on here. I want it to be a learning endeavor, and we'll focus on the call as a funnel. So just getting the intro down. So I usually deploy like those strategies, and I really normalize like failure. Like, it's okay. Like, I failed so many times. You don't need a million yeses. You just need a certain number of yeses. And so much of that is through the process of continual improvement. And so I think when you normalize that, especially with calls, people tend to beat themselves up, and just listening to them regularly. The last thing I'll say about all of this is that we have a scoring framework up. And if people don't have that, I gave a talk on just that one topic about 8 months ago, and I asked the room how many people are listening to their calls, how many people are scoring your calls, and there's hundreds of people in the room. One person raised their hand. So I think if you don't know what you're looking for as a leader, then how is a rep supposed to know what they're supposed to be doing? And if the rep is saying, if the manager is saying, oh, you need to hit your quota, and the rep doesn't know how to do it, they should be able to feel comfortable enough to say, how can I do that? And can you help me get there?
That's it. I always wondered why people would count phone calls and spend zero time scoring them.
Yeah.
Right? Because an A call is very different than a B call.
Exactly. Yeah.
And is that how you do it, A, B, or C? Or
so we have three we like the number 5, but we like the number 3 more because it keeps things very simple. So we have 3 categories for SDR, AE, and AM calls, and then we weight discovery portions of the call heavier. And then so we do 1 to 5 for non-discovery sections, and 1 to 10 for. That's how we weight it, and it's worked really well for us in getting that weighted score with the emphasis on discovery. So we place a lot of emphasis there, but that's the way we do it.
And do they mark it in the CRM, or how do you do it?
Yeah, in the CRM.
Okay.
We've created like custom fields in the CRM, and then that automates a report that's sent out to me daily, actually.
Yeah. And do they rate themselves per day on how well they did that day?
Yeah. So we get a lot of our, we place a big emphasis on email, and we also have some emphasis on calls for example, for the SDRs. And so their connected calls, they'll score all of them for that day. And then for the AEs and account managers, it's their discovery calls, although we do have a separate framework set up for follow-up calls too, which is similar but a little bit different.
Yeah, and do you care about number of calls as much?
So I used to be a manager that did. My views have evolved significantly since like when I was like a sales rep. I think a lot of people view it as like you need to hit this number of calls and it's like very high. I don't think of it that way. I think of it more as like compound interest. So like if you do the act, especially for AEs, if you do the act of prospecting every day, it will compound over time and really help you. So I'm not asking, it's like going to the gym, like, you're not going to go once and be ripped. You're not going to be, read one book and be super, it's the consistent and concerted effort every single day. And so that's what I really encourage the team to do. So I focus less on like these huge numbers and then holding and managing people to the numbers because, there are people that can be really successful and get these big accounts and be really successful through being more creative and through figuring out other ways in innovation. You don't always see it coming. So I think not managing that number has been good for us. For the SDRs, we have like a minimum, like you should be at least hitting this really, really low number and everyone is usually able to hit that. And it's a great way to get people ramped up and feeling confident and good that they're like hitting that number. If they're not, it's like something's going wrong because that number is pretty low. But generally people go above that. So the way I used to manage was it was a very high number and everyone had to reach that. I've really gotten away from that. And now it's like, hey, this is a low number, work the way that you want, but I'm going to be looking, as long as the results are there at the end.
So the structure is much more habit-based.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that word compounding because that's really my view on sales. It should be compounding instead of Groundhog Day, waking up every day to the same music, stepping in the same puddle. Right?
Yeah. I mean, when I was an account executive, I stopped prospecting like, oh, I got this. It just came off the best month ever. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I have no pipeline.
Right. Right. You have a system. You do this on Monday. You do a minimum number of things, like showing up at 9, right?
Exactly.
There's a minimum structure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And usually people, I think, if you're hiring ambitious people who are self-starters and all those great things that we put in our job description, they will naturally want to. I very rarely do I meet people that don't want to do a good job, inherently. So I don't, I think there's room to treat people more like adults in this area who like really want to own their own success. And I think, sometimes in a lot of companies I see, we kind of handhold a little bit, and sometimes people need that, but I think autonomy is important too.
Yeah. Great. Hey, there's been a great conversation. Where can people go to follow you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn is the best place to find me. You can just search Michael Tuso. That's the best way. You can also email me, michael@chilipiper.com.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Hey, I want to make sure you're checking out b2brevenue.com. That is where you can get a free copy of an ebook that I did. It's a real ebook. It's not a fluff book. It shows and talks about how companies make buying decisions and how you can influence that from both a marketing and a sales standpoint, how to find all the people that are in the decision path and what they need to see, know, and touch and feel before they make a product selection. If your team needs some coaching, some help, some training, some systems, some processes that do work today, because we know what doesn't work, or what doesn't work, I'll show you what does work and how to connect and get into pretty much any account. It includes deal coaching and content community, and I can customize it for your particular company. Just go to b2brevenue.com, look under training, schedule a call with me. We can talk it over, or just sign up. You can pay per month or all at once, whichever makes most sense for your budget. Also, I put out videos pretty much daily on LinkedIn and on YouTube. On LinkedIn, it's Brian G. Burns, and on YouTube, it's Brian Burns Sales. Just search for that if you like to consume some video content. And if you see me on LinkedIn, please put a comment and a share and a like on some of the videos. I really appreciate it. I've got a company page for each podcast. This one, the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast, where I put both content and humor videos out daily. And tell a friend about the podcast. Really appreciate you listening. Check out the show notes for all the partners and the connections you can make there, the coupon codes for the products to evaluate them, see if they're a right match for you. And we'll see you next time.